Marvel's Avengers, Earth's mightiest heroes. With long-standing comic runs and an incredibly successful movie universe, one could assume that such notoriety would lend itself to a successful game franchise. Well, one would think. In this video, I'm going to be detailing what exactly went wrong in the lead up and execution of Marvel's Avengers, and what led this game to becoming the mess that it's known for today. Now, to be clear, this is not a review of the game or gameplay itself. It's a retrospective look at the developers' actions leading up to the launch and how they handled themselves throughout the longevity of this game. By further extension, I think it is important to look at the game, see how it was treated, and observe the resulting consequences it had on the entire industry. Now, regardless of what your opinion of the game is, I do implore you to leave your thoughts in the comments down below. What has been your personal experience with this game? And while you're down there, if you don't mind, please leave the video a like and sub to the channel, and consider joining my Patreon to get videos like this as well as other benefits early. Now, the gameplay in this video has been graciously provided to us by King Pig John, so thank you so much for that. Please go ahead and check out his social links, including his Twitch. His links will be in the description as well. But let's start at the beginning. First revealed to us at E3 2019, the Avengers game promised to be the best, the most intuitive, and the most in-depth experience at becoming your favorite Avenger to date. At the reveal, it was said to combine action-adventure with cinematic storytelling. Marvel's Avengers vowed to give you, the player, the choice of not only being your desired hero, but to give you the best experience, to get a taste of what it's actually like to be one of Earth's mightiest heroes. It was advertised as a live service game which promised to be supported with constantly evolving content, stories, and villains for years to come. It was also announced that this game was being developed by Crystal Dynamics, which, to many, served as a very peculiar choice. Crystal Dynamics, best known for their other games such as Tomb Raider, Gex, and Soul Reaver, had never really worked on a live service game before. Most of their games were also single-player story games, so the decision to lock them into a live service Avengers game with a focus on multiplayer, when they've never really displayed any innate skill or passion for this type of game before, was certainly strange. This sentiment was also carried out by the president and head of Square Enix, Yosuke Masuda, years later in an interview conducted in November 2021, where he did say that Crystal Dynamics was a bad fit for the Marvel's Avengers given their lack of experience with games in a live service model. Again, they never really displayed any interest or skill in a live service game previously, so why were they selected to develop this game? Well, Masuda stated in 2019 that Crystal has always been a company that's made games in the action-adventure space. He said that, in a sense, I thought that it would be a good fit in terms of making a game with Marvel using the Avengers, which would naturally be an action-based game. I mean, if your only prerequisite to landing this game was to have made good action games beforehand, there are dozens of other more suited companies that come to mind. Some more suited because they've actually cracked the code of making successful live service games, other more suitable because they've made successful superhero games. Now, speaking of other superhero games, naturally points of comparisons will always be made from this Marvel game to other Marvel games or just superhero games in general. The Avengers game was so poorly received that it actually had a negative impact on another game that was completely unrelated. The Guardians of the Galaxy game, often touted as being the game that Marvel's Avengers wishes it was, also underperformed despite receiving very positive reviews. Many of the reviews under Marvel's Avengers expressed to avoid the Avengers game entirely and just play the Guardians game instead. However, the damage had already been done. People saw that the Guardians game was tied to Square Enix being the game's publisher, saw that the Avengers game was also under Square Enix, and assumed that if this is how superhero games turn out under Square, they'll avoid the Guardians game entirely. It's the fool me once mentality. However, instead of the lackluster character development, stiff combat, and data controls found in the Avengers game, the Guardians of the Galaxy game captures its audience by looking at the Avengers game and doing the complete opposite. It had a very personal and compelling narrative. It introduced characters and made us care for them and gave us choices in the game that truly felt like they mattered. It was a game that deserved to thrive, but the impact of Marvel's Avengers reached too far. Now, according to recent reports, Square Enix has actually lost over $200 million from a combination of the Marvel's Avengers game and the Guardians game. Supposedly, the loss from these two games was so bad that it actually forced Square Enix to change how they reported their revenues to their investors. I'm showing a few quick screenshots here, but I'll leave a full link to the thread in the description below for you to read. It is truly baffling to me that a game performs so bad that it completely restructures communicative information to a company's investors as to not inspire fear and result them in dumping the company through their stocks. As little as 3 months into this game's launch, Square had already reported that the Avengers game was non-profitable and that the cost to develop the game were still higher than the actual sale profits. In even more recent news, Square Enix sold a bunch of its IPs and the studios behind them for $300 million to get more into a crashing NFT market. So you can see that their priorities are a little bit jumbled up, and it's kind of like the blind leading the blind. The fault does not lie solely with Crystal Dynamics. Square Enix is equally as responsible. You have one company look at another company to make a type of game that they had no prior experience in making, then being disappointed in their company after their product was predictably shit, and then selling off its treasure trove of other profitable games and franchises to enter into a crashing NFT market that has been laughed at and shunned by the general public and the gaming community. I mean, when you put it like that, was there ever really any hope for the Avengers game at all? So you can see the fallout that this game had. It impacted other games, it even forced an entire company to change its reporting practices. But why was it so poorly received? Why was there such a drop off in players, and why was the overall reception of this IP slammed? Well, it essentially comes down to the deceptive and money grabbing tactics mixed with a clear lack of experience and a care for the product. Let's start with the bugs. This game runs extremely poorly. I won't touch on this too much because this isn't a review of the game, but it does need to be acknowledged. Even up to as little as 1 month ago from the time of that this video was uploaded, there are multiple complaints about the game crashing after one of its most recent updates. There are so many complaints about this game crashing on the PS5. You have people complaining that Thor does 0 damage despite having ultimate Odin Force, which, is really super helpful online. That must feel really good. And there are multiple reports that players' games are crashing at the first cutscene, so some people can't even get into the game. Again, this is as recent as 1 month ago, and the game has already been out for 1.5 years. The bugs are completely unacceptable and make the game unplayable. There are worlds that don't load in properly, characters hovering when they should be swinging like they're meant to, animation cycles not working properly, and who knew that Spider-Man could actually fly? All these clips were uploaded to Reddit within 1 week of me recording and uploading this. This isn't me looking at the horrid launch and trying to find something from years ago. This is as recent as it gets. The game, 1.5 years after its release, is still an unplayable mess. In John's footage that you're seeing on screen now, he captured this 1 day before me recording this, and you can see that the frames stutter in points of high action. On top of that, enemies get stuck in the wall and take 0 damage. These enemies must be killed in order to progress the mission, so unless the game fixes itself somehow, players are forced to restart the entire segment of the game just to progress. As also seen from this footage provided by John, I've just asked him to go into the store in an attempt to show you what it's like to buy something. I was wanting to simply show you the pricing, however the game was so bugged that it wouldn't even let him make a purchase. It just glitched every time and there's no pricing on anything. This could possibly be a missed setting somewhere that might disable in-store purchases, I don't know, but just given how much this game tries to sell you things and the numerous amount of bugs players experience, I'd be inclined to also chalk this up to a bug. So those are just some of the many bugs in this game, but how has this game actually been deceitful? Well, let's start with one of everyone's favorite characters, Spider-Man. Players who pre-ordered this game on the PlayStation were informed of several benefits such as early access to the beta and later revealed exclusive access to Spider-Man as a playable character. Unbeknownst to those players, Spider-Man wouldn't actually be playable for over a year after the game's release. The game released on 4th September 2020 with a heavy push to pre-order on PlayStation consoles to play as Spider-Man. However, players would not be able to play him until the 30th of November 2021, a full 1 year and 2 months later after the game's launch. They used Spider-Man as bait to get people to buy this game. There was never any indication given to players as to when he will actually be available. Eventually, people just stopped asking. The game became a laughingstock and people stopped caring and just simply moved on. It was not worth the time investment. And even when Spider-Man was released, the swinging was horrible and slow, the combat was lackluster, he was riddled with bugs, and he doesn't even get a proper story. His whole introduction into this game is told through still art panels. It's the pure definition of laziness. Now, the next point of the deception is their monetary system. Now, when the game was first revealed back at E3 2019, they promised that there would not be any random loot boxes or pay-to-win scenarios.
So our promise to the community is that we won't have random loot boxes or pay-to-win scenarios. Won't have random loot boxes or pay-to-win scenarios.
Enter the Hero's Catalyst. The Hero's Catalyst was something that you could purchase in the marketplace within the game. Now, the marketplace in this game wasn't anything new. You could buy skins and cosmetics from day one. People didn't really like it, as you also had to pay full price for this game, but the difference is that those things in the marketplace were purely cosmetic, and the Hero's Catalyst was an XP boosting feature. An XP boosting feature? Others might even call it a pay to win. You know, the thing that they promised they wouldn't do. Players could purchase these consumables and get a range of buffs to their XP to assist in leveling faster. What's even worse about this is that in March of 2021, the team behind the Avengers intentionally nerfed leveling and gaining XP across the board, resulting in the game becoming harder to level. So they nerfed the leveling and gaining XP back in March, and then introduced a paid feature to increase the leveling capacity in October. They did eventually remove the Hero's Catalyst feature a little over a month after introducing it due to the public outcry, but this just really shows where their intentions truly lie, and it also shows how deceptive they are. There has previously been some fairly decent communication with the players about what is on the way through the use of roadmaps, and I'll get into those in a moment, but for now I'd like to also talk about the disappointing roster. At the time of the game's release, you could play as Captain America, Iron Man, Black Widow, Thor, Hulk, and Ms. Marvel. 3 months later, in December of 2020, they introduced Kate Bishop, who wields a bow and arrow and has a lot of arrow-related attacks. 3 to 4 months later after that, they introduced Hawkeye, who also had a variety of attacks that centered around a bow and arrow. There are some differences between the two, but what was the thinking behind introducing two characters that have incredibly similar abilities back to back? It makes no sense. They then introduced Black Panther in the War for Wakanda expansion in August of 2021, which I'm told is probably one of the best things in the game. And they also added in Spider-Man in November 2021, however, as previously mentioned, he is exclusive to PlayStation players only. So this makes for 9 playable characters, or 10 if you're playing on the PlayStation. Now, data miners have uncovered a bunch of other characters too, but data mining does not actually confirm that these characters will eventually turn up or be playable. Now, credit where credit is due. The developers are constantly adding new skins to the game, and they are fairly active with their community, showing roadmaps as to what players can expect in the next coming month. However, I'm sad to say that this has all come to a halt. As seen in this thread here from a Crystal Dynamics developer posted in April of this year, Crystal Dynamics have shied away from formally structured roadmaps that reveal the next few months out in detail. They do say that they have current plans for the next few months, however those aren't really baked yet. They go on further to say that they have set up expectations that now need to be reset. But I can't help but wonder if this has anything to do with Square Enix selling its IPs and studios, including Crystal Dynamics, and is this spelling the end for the Avengers game, leaving the players in the dark? It seems like a very weird course correction where you had month and month planned out in structured roadmaps, and just when IPs and studios are being sold off, there's hardly any communication to the players. Very coincidental timing. Now, there's no solid evidence or statements made as to whether Embrace Group, the company that bought all the IPs and studios from Square, will continue the live servers of Marvel's Avengers. But let's be real here. If you were in charge of a company that acquired a disappointing, publicly panned, poor performing game franchise as a part of a larger deal, would you spend the money to try to redeem it? Or would you just chalk it up to being part of a larger deal and let it die? If I were a business person, I would just simply chalk it up that that game was someone else's mess and let it slowly fade away to focus on the other projects in the acquisition that will be more successful and ultimately more profitable. If for some reason you do take the view that the game needs to be revitalized, you have to ask yourself what the actual incentive is. Currently, at the time of this recording, there are 228 live players playing the Avengers on Steam, with a 24-hour peak of a little over 300. For a live service game that promised constantly revolving content, stories, missions, a unique multiplayer experience, and an ability to be whatever Avenger you want, those are some incredibly abysmal numbers. There may also be some more players on console, but given all the bugs and just trying to get into the game, I doubt that that number is significantly higher. Now, I haven't even touched on the buggy multiplayer where users are now just recommending to play in single player mode as you'll experience less bugs, nor have I even mentioned that the terrible upgrade system where your character doesn't change their appearance when you apply external facing items, or that for the longest time, most of the characters looked terrible to the point where Crystal Dynamics had to redesign the characters after launch because of how ugly they were. There is just so much to talk about in this game and there just isn't enough time, but from this video you can see that this game was doomed from the start. I do not have the fondest sentiments toward this game. I can see somewhat of an appeal for fans of hack and slash games or for those fond of a live service game, but there are so many better options out there for you. From the beta, I could see just how uninspired, unpolished, unrefined and disappointing this game would be. Pair that with the blatant lies to the players, using characters to bait people into pre-ordering, the repetitive gameplay, a poignant emphasis on simply making as much money from the players for as long as possible without providing any real value in return, and the insane amount of game-breaking bugs still present 1.5 years after its release. Marvel's Avengers could have gone down in history as one of the greats, but instead, it's left in the back of its players' minds, withering away as they try to forget that they were once upon a time hopeful and interested in this mess of a game. So guys, let me know in the comments down below, what has been your personal experience with the game? Did you avoid it, or did you pick it up, did you refund it, or are you still playing it to today? Again, I want to thank John for providing the footage on screen, and if you did like the video, please go ahead, leave it a like, subscribe to the channel, and consider joining my Patreon. Links to everything is in the description below. And speaking of Patreon, I do want to thank the patrons on screen now. Your support means the absolute world to me. But that's all for today's video, guys. Take care, stay safe out there, and I will see you in the next one.